Hello and welcome to our study, the Bodhisattva Guide. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's commentary on the Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. So, welcome La. So as always, kindly generate the awareness of how this study is intended to be the remedy for the suffering that we can see pervades the condition of sentient beings everywhere. So then, recalling the essential premise of the Buddhist teaching, as we find it formulated in the Vinaya, where we say, abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. And then from the Prajnaparamita, in regards to the nature of phenomena, like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. In the jewels of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we take refuge until we attain enlightenment. By the merit of practicing generosity and the like, may we attain Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. In the jewels of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we take refuge until we attain enlightenment. By the merit of practicing generosity and the like, may we attain Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. In the jewels of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we take refuge until we attain enlightenment. By the merit of practicing generosity and the like, may we attain Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. So, in our study, we've presently actually arrived at the chapter of patience. Patience comes with a little bit of a I don't know. Patience is a work in project, right? So I think we all have a humble recognition that patience is something very useful. And we generally define patience as not giving in to anger. But of course, here we're not in any way talking about some sort of unhealthy proposition of suppressing anger or pretending to not be angry if we are angry and all of that. That has nothing to do with it. And something that always seems to be, get in the way of the understanding is also the notion that patience should all of a sudden render us limp and and passive. And that's not at all the implication either. Patience, you could say in a modern vernacular, means not losing our cool, because our cool is intelligent. When we are impatient, it's when we lose our cool. It's when we become ineffective, weak, possibly pathetic, and simply just destroy our own well-being, our own wisdom, our own compassion. It all goes flying out the window on the basis of something profoundly ignorant. And that's what we want to get to the bottom of. It's the third paramita. We have generosity and discipline. And in the context of the way of the Bodhisattva, that's not particularly spelled out, partly because this was addressed to persons who already are on the path, and implicit in, you could say, the entire spiritual endeavor, then generosity, in that there's no holding on to our ordinary fixations, it's accomplished. And in that we abide by our spiritual discipline, then that is also accomplished. So in this way, the first two paramitas don't have specific chapters in the context of the way of the Bodhisattva, but they are assumed to be implicit. Now, then there's some chapters on particularly then how we guard this quality of discipline through awareness and vigilant introspection or attention and carefulness. But here in the 6th chapter, patience, we're dealing with this transcendent virtue which takes us out of suffering. So patience refers to getting a grip on this condition that very much destroys everything that we're aiming towards. It destroys our spirituality. And we see it again and again. The burst of impatience, if we are half intelligent, is always followed by some sort of like, yes, I could have done better there. So there should be some general sense that we have a problem when we're lacking patience. And so there's never ever a sense, again, needs to be said, that patience implies that we're just going to put up with all sorts of, injustice, that we're going to put up with things that are wrong. That's not at all what's implicit in patience. Patience means not losing our cool. But we need to be aware of how destructive anger is and how there's a need to get a grip on this. So His Holiness says this chapter deals with patience, which, together with meditative concentration, the subject of the 8th chapter, constitute the key aspects for the training in bodhicitta. The instructions contained in these 2 chapters are very powerful aids to practice. Yeah, we agree on that. And then His Holiness quotes Shantideva, all the good works gathered in 1,000 ages, such as deeds of generosity and offerings to the blissful ones, in a single flash of anger shatters them. No evil is there similar to anger, no austerity to be compared with patience. Steep yourself, therefore, in patience, in various ways, insistently. So, His Holiness says, as a destructive force, there is nothing as strong as anger. An instant of anger can destroy all the positive actions accumulated over thousands of kalpas through the practice of generosity, making offerings to the Buddhas, keeping discipline, and so on. Indeed, there is no fault as serious as anger. So, of course, this can be understood in different ways, but the point really is that anger is something that really hurts us deep down within. Now, it's also important to understand when we're talking about this is because this can be remedied. The anger sometimes is constructed as intelligent. Sometimes Vajrayanas, they sort of pick up that, yes, Vajra anger, isn't that mirror-like wisdom, and so on. And yes, when it's not filtered through confusion, then the quality, the sharpness, the intelligence of anger, that's great. But when it's not that, and this awareness that something needs to be done is filtered through insecurity of ego, the narrow construction of our perceptions as it is perceived through our optics of confusion. Yes, that's where it deeply, deeply affects us. Now, so it needs to be understood, the toxicity of anger, but then also, of course, what's implicit is this can be remedied. So it's not as if once we've had a fit of anger, then we're stuck forever with it. So just like anger can destroy, then also this is something that can be remedied. So His Holiness says, patience, on the other hand, as a discipline that neutralizes and prevents us from succumbing to anger, is unrivaled. So this is where we have, right on our hands, we have the solution. So it's not just that we're stuck with an angry disposition that we can't do anything about, except maybe just try to forget it. Then rather here on the path of awakening, there's a very clear awareness of what can be done with ourselves. And we have patience. And patience is not just putting a lid on something, but it's rather just beginning to see through some of the confused assumptions that are basic to anger and how it's simply just not, you could say, helpful. It's not constructive. So discipline is something that is very helpful, and it's as such unrivaled with regards to anger. His Holiness says, through it, the suffering we endure from the heat of the negative emotions is relieved. It is therefore of the utmost importance that we resolve to practice patience, gaining inspiration through reflecting on its advantages and on the terrible effects of anger. So sometimes we compare patience a bit to the cooling moon that you have in India at night when you've been enduring the heat of the sun beating down. Then you have the cooling heat of the moon at night, which is then the image for patience. His Holiness says here the term positive actions refer to generosity, making offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, keeping discipline, as it's explained in Entrance to the Middle Way, which is also known as Introduction to the Middle Way by Chandrakirti. So in the third chapter there, then there's explanations on the practice of patience. It does not refer to the merit gained through the realization of emptiness. Anger cannot destroy this type of merit, nor can the anger of a lower state of mind destroy the positive actions accumulated with a superior state of mind. And that's where we then talk about the practices of meditation. Sorry. The footnote says, for example, the merit gained through the meditation of a celestial being Deva in the realm of formlessness cannot be destroyed by anger arising in the human state. So both in the level of emptiness, which is free from any conceptual reference points, and also at the level of the gods, then this absorption is not harmed by ordinary anger. It's not touched by it. In brief, there are two types of merit that anger cannot destroy. Patience, on the other, apart from these, the good effects of all other ordinary positive actions can be destroyed by anger. Nevertheless, this depends on the intensity of the anger, on the magnitude of the positive action, and on the person on whom our anger is directed. In this way, a positive action can be weakened or entirely destroyed through anger. So, of course, as with anything in the Buddhist understanding of action, the result of it is mitigated by circumstances. So what also plays in is the degree of the anger. It's not like, oh, there I had an anger, this results in that. We would say the seed of the anger could potentially bring about this, just like the seed of an apple could could result in an apple tree. But how it evolves has so much to do with if it's planted in the ground, for one, if it's actually nourished and attended to through the quality of the soil, moisture, sunlight, etc. So all of the results of anger is not just a one-shot deal in terms of anger brings this, but rather it has a lot to do with, like His Holiness says, the intensity, the person that our anger is directed at, etc. His Holiness says positive actions are difficult to perform and therefore do not occur frequently. It's hard to have positive thoughts when one's mind is influenced by emotions and confused by adverse conditions. So of course, positive actions happen, but in that most of us are driven by ego, driven by some self-centered ignorance, then very often we operate from this destructive place. So positive actions don't always happen. Negative thoughts arise by themselves, and it's difficult to make our actions truly positive when our intention and the way we carry them through are not perfectly pure. So of course, this is where we're talking about a dynamic. in which our present condition is by nature confused. We are samsaric beings. We're delusional in the sense of we're fixated on self. And in that way, then there's a natural inclination towards negative thoughts. But of course they happen. And Buddha nature, you could say, is the underlying condition, although it's obscured. And so there's plenty of times also where positive actions take place. But there's a condition right now where we don't have the perfect purity of freedom from this condition of confusion. So His Holiness says, our meager stock of hard-won positive actions is rendered powerless in an instant of anger. So we blow it, and this very much defines our experience. The damage is immeasurably more serious than if we had lost something more easily acquired. So again, this is where we would say there's nothing worse than anger. So Shantideva says, those tormented by the pain of anger never know tranquility of mind. Strangers they will be to every pleasure. They will neither sleep nor feel secure. When people get angry, they lose all sense of happiness. Even if they are good looking and normally peaceful, their faces turn livid and ugly. Anger upsets their physical well-being and disturbs their rest. It destroys their appetites and makes them age prematurely. Happiness, peace, and sleep evade them, and they no longer appreciate people who have helped them and deserve their trust and gratitude. Under the influence of anger, people of normally good character change completely and can no longer be counted on. They're ruined by their anger, and they ruin others too. But anyone who puts all their energy into destroying anger will be happy in this life and in lives to come. So from the point of view that anger brings so much suffering, it's something which is counter to our happiness, and we would define that as as an enemy. And this enemy, again, this is not an enemy that we can overcome by just sort of vanquish them brutally, because the enemy is, first of all, internal to ourselves. It's basic to us, and it's not handled by just, you could say, feeding the power through our giving it attention. Rather, we need to be skillful, and that's where we need to have wisdom that cuts through it. We can't just sort of kill it in an ordinary sense. But it is something that we should understand really needs to be eliminated, needs to be destroyed, as His Holiness says here. Simply because this is what really destroys our happiness in this life and in future happinesses and future lives. So Shantideva says, getting what I do not want and all that hinders my desire, in discontent my anger finds its fuel. From this it grows and beats me down. So His Holiness says, when we think of someone who has wronged us, or who is doing or might do something we or our friends dislike, depriving us of what we want, our minds, which were at peace just a moment before, suddenly become slightly agitated. So initially there's an identification that there's something I don't want. And then where we had before possibly sort of a state of equilibrium or well-being, that thought all of a sudden comes in. There's something I don't like that's happening here. This circumstance, that person, this possible event, that event that has already happened, this sort of discomfort sort of sneaks in. And then this state of mind fuels negative thoughts. Then we begin to elaborate on it. Then it gains traction. What an awful person, we think, and our dislike turns into hatred. It is this first stage, this unsettled feeling, that kindles our hatred that we should try to get rid of. This is where we nip it in the bud, so to speak. But other than that, these narratives can become really incredibly powerful. They can become realities. It's not even something we want to discuss. this is bad, that person is bad, and so on. And that's where it initially, where it's just the thought, it gains traction in terms of fueling our kleshas, becomes a severely toxic sort of condition of our mind, and then we act out on it. We get angry at that person, verbally, physically, or even just sustaining anger in our mind. And that's where it lays down what we then call karma. It lays down imprints within our consciousness. And this becomes part of who we are. This becomes part of our identity. And that is then where we begin to age prematurely. That's where we get pale, or we get agitated. We have these various kinds of equilibriums. So in this way, the initial thought, as it gains traction, affects us and becomes part of us, and then also imprints within our all ground and stays within our consciousness. Again, this is something that's workable. So we're not talking about something that can't be addressed, but there needs to be an initial recognition of this condition of anger. That is why Shantideva says, therefore I will utterly destroy the sustenance of this my enemy, my foe, who has no other purpose but to hurt and injure me. So the real enemy is not, those people out there or this circumstance. The real enemy is our impatience. It's our anger. That's what really hurts and injures us. So His Holiness says we should try to use any means to get rid of this initial feeling of uneasiness. So come what may, I'll not upset my cheerful happiness of mind. Dejection never brings me what I want. My virtue will be warped and marred by it. If there's a remedy when trouble strikes, what reason is there for dejection? And if there is no help for it, what use is there in being glum? This, by the way, you very often see, this last one, we very often see, if there's a solution to the problem, what's the problem? If there's not a solution, well, what's it going to help to worry? We have the sort of fridge magnet versions of this in various forms, but this is then where it comes from. Chapter 6, verse 10, in the way of the Bodhisattva. It's a very good meditation, very helpful. His Holiness says we must make an effort to remain in a relaxed state of mind. But unless we get rid of this unsettled feeling, it will feed our hatred, causing it to grow and eventually destroy us. Anger is worse than any ordinary enemy. Of course, ordinary enemies harm us. That is why we call them enemies. But the wrong they do to us is intended to help themselves or their friends, not just to make us unhappy. On the other hand, the inner enemy, anger, has no other function than to destroy our positive actions and make us suffer. That is why Shantideva says, my foe, who has no other purpose but to hurt and injure me. From the moment it appears, it exists for the sole purpose of harming us. So we should confront it with the means we have. Let us maintain a peaceful state of mind and avoid getting upset. So somebody who is our external enemy, if we look at them, let's say somebody wants to steal something from us, or they perceive us as being a terrible person, and so they slander us, or they maybe even are physically violent or whatever. They're coming from a place of profound ignorance and from a place of possibly wanting to do a crime of acquisition or enrichment of some sort, or they act out their particular condition. But from the point of view of wishing to gain satisfaction or whatever it might be. So there's an agenda on their part, which really comes from a possibly misguided, but nevertheless essential sort of idea of wanting something and maybe getting something out of it. If they steal something from us or whatever it might be, then there's somebody behind there that you could say gets something out of it. But our anger has no other purpose except just being a self-perpetuation of this condition of aggression. From the point of view of the ignorance of ego, this is essentially what that perpetuates the cocoon of ego. It's where we keep winding the drama around me, and that might give some sense of fulfillment in the sense of feeling me stronger. As much as I might be suffering, I have a strong sense of me, and so on. But that has only the only effect. It doesn't benefit anybody whatsoever, and it really just comes from ego's own attempt to solidify itself. And so it's entirely on the agenda of ignorance and perpetuating this confused condition. So that's where His Holiness says it exists for the sole purpose of harming us. We should confront it by all the means we have. And then he says, let us maintain a peaceful state of mind and avoid getting upset. Again, this is not about sort of just keeping up appearances, but really getting to the bottom of this condition of aggression. So His Holiness says, what irritates us in the first place is that our wishes are not fulfilled. By remaining upset does not help fulfill those wishes. So we neither fulfill our wishes nor regain our cheerfulness. This disconcerted state, from which anger can grow, is the most dangerous. We should try never to let our happy frame of mind be disturbed. There's also, like we have in the Lojong, where it says, always remain on a joyful, always depend, always rely on a joyful state of mind. So His Holiness continues, whether we are suffering at present or have suffered in the past, there is no reason to be unhappy. If we can remedy it, why be unhappy? If we cannot, what is the use in being depressed about it? That just adds more unhappiness and does no good at all. So if we have a problem and we can remedy it, then there's no problem. And if we have an unfortunate condition, there's no help in us resenting it and saying, I don't want that here. If it's there, we can't do anything about it. That attitude is just going to add to our unhappiness. It has no constructive value whatsoever. Again, what we're talking about here is a condition of aggression in which we're resenting an existing presence or reality, something that we perceive as being negative. And that's where we're perpetuating a pattern of aggression that then is projected outward. And this begins to feed a vicious cycle of the outer world then coming back at us with that aggression. This is the cause of what we call hell. Hell is not some external geographic location or something that was sort of invented by the church to make the submissive sea of believers submit to the perverse power of some institution, but rather hell is just the phenomenology of aggression. And so that's where when we have anger, we have more and more the sense that the outer world is against us. So this perpetuates. The more we sense the outer world is against us, the more we become angry, the more that feeds that perception. So it's a very, very vicious and self-perpetuating circle. Again, what we're talking about here is the solution to this. So His Holiness says, this initial disconcerted state, which gives rise to anger, is caused by things we do not want. For example, we do not want our friends or ourselves to suffer or be insulted, criticized, or treated with disdain. When we cannot avoid these things, we become sad. On the other hand, we feel satisfaction when it is our enemies who suffer such things, and we are not pleased when things go well for them. That's where we get annoyed when it's going well for the opponent. So Shantideva says, the cause of happiness is rare, and many are the seeds of suffering. But if I have no pain, I'll never long for freedom. Therefore, O my mind, be steadfast. So that's where there could be a positive angle on unfortunate circumstances. His Holiness says, in general, we have to make a great deal of effort to obtain happiness while suffering comes naturally. Again, because of our insecure, confused fixation and addiction to our self-centering, then we tend to gravitate towards what is painful. And to break out of that and obtaining happiness comes rare. The very fact of having a body inevitably involves suffering. Sufferings are numerous and their causes abundant. So this, of course, is understanding the fragile nature of our body. His Holiness says a wise person can achieve happiness by transforming these causes of happiness into favorable conditions. This is where we could have that glimpse where we say, these difficult circumstances that I'm having, they're very helpful in terms of my, I was talking with a friend yesterday who was saying, it helps, these circumstances have helped my personal growth. But that requires that there is this exceptional condition of wisdom, which can come on the basis of having been exposed to some inspiration that guides us in that direction. But it is something that is basically about us thinking out of the box. And so that's where a wise person, someone who thinks out of the box, can transform these circumstances. So His Holiness says we can use suffering as a means to progress. As Shantideva says, if I have no pain, I'll never long for freedom. We can also say that that pain that comes from our self-centering is indicative of Buddha nature, because it's where our you could say abuse of our condition in terms of perpetuating our ignorance, abusing our Buddha nature, then naturally our Buddha nature is, you could say, sends out a signal. Just like if we're healthy and we eat junk food, then there's a reaction. So thanks to pain, then there actually is the intelligence that could bring about this wish for freedom. So His Holiness said it's only natural that we dislike suffering. But if we can develop the willpower to bear difficulties, then we will grow more and more tolerant, as it is said in the text. There's nothing that does not grow light through habit and familiarity. Putting up with little cares, I'll train myself to bear with great adversity. So presently we could have difficulties, but they could be even worse. And if we can handle just these little difficulties we're having now, then we'll be able to handle greater challenges later on. Shantideva says, heat and cold, the wind and rain, sickness, prison, beatings. I'll not fret about such things. To do so also aggravates my trouble. So His Holiness says, if we are very forbearing, then something we would normally consider very painful will not appear so bad after all. But without patient endurance, even the smallest thing becomes unbearable. A lot depends on our attitude. So this, of course, is if we've been familiarized to complain about circumstances and that we can't bear even the slightest discomfort, then we're going to be very delicate, very fragile, and very vulnerable, easy targets for suffering. So that's where we should actually begin to adopt the attitude that these little discomforts are something that actually we should appreciate. As soon as we see that there's a need for patience, we say, here's an opportunity to practice patience. So Shantideva then says, there are some whose bravery increases at the sight of their own blood, while some lose all their strength and faint when it's another's blood they see. So we should adopt a sort of a heroicism here, not sort of a narcissistic heroicism of vanity, but rather just a willingness to get over ourselves and to be more resilient, fully willing to face the challenges there are. Similarly, His Holiness says, if we can develop patient endurance, we will be able to bear even great difficulties when they come our way. So we could probably realistically assert that there will be greater difficulties up ahead. To be forbearing means that even when confronted with great suffering or harm, we do not let it disturb our minds. Of course, it's difficult to regard sufferings as desirable and transform them into favorable conditions. We have to be patient as we wage a determined war on negative emotions such as hatred, the worst of enemies. It's naturally to expect injuries when doing battle with an ordinary enemy, so fighting the essential enemy, hatred, will not be without difficulty. But if we ignore all such ordeals and conquer negative emotions, then we can truly be called heroes. On the other hand, succumbing to anger and killing an ordinary enemy is no braver than stabbing someone who is dead already. There's nothing extraordinary about that. So killing somebody outside, that's just perpetuating the same old, getting satisfaction in terms of somebody that we dislike and we manage to put them down or whatever. We might think, gosh, that feels so good, but we're just perpetuating the same pattern that's going to be regurgitating the same scenario over and over. So there's absolutely nothing particular about that. Whereas if we're determined to not give in to anger, then we're already on the path to doing something that truly has benefit. So that's where we're breaking out of the box, we're breaking out of a habitual pattern. So that's where we're doing something that truly is creating something greater. This is where we can talk about heroism. So the intention here is not something masochistic, where we're sort of just something about being martyrs, where I'm just going to bear all this suffering, and we grit our teeth. And that's not at all what is intended. It's going beyond that, because just gritting our teeth and putting up with things, that's just staying in the same place. That's not helpful at all. But it's actually being able to see this is something that could enable us to get over this condition of anger. This is where we could get over this condition that again and again plunges us into suffering. So that's where the paramita of patience is, where we begin to have a wider perspective on what's happening and determined to go through with it. And that's why also we would sometimes say people who've been harmed in battle, they're sort of proud to show their scars. So similarly, also, there's not really any worry about what might happen in terms of wounds and so forth. We're willing to, we don't see this as absolute. The wounds or the discomforts that we come across are not seen as absolute. They're just seen as a slight discomfort. And the more that we prevail, then whatever discomfort we've gone through is something that we're actually proud that we went through. Otherwise, just sort of giving in at the first little discomfort, we're never going to actually break free of this. So Shantideva says, suffering also has its worth. Through sorrow, pride is driven out, and pity felt for those who wander in samsara. Evil is avoided, goodness seems delightful. So our suffering, His Holiness says, also has a positive side. For one thing, we lose our sense of self-importance. We learn to appreciate the suffering of others, and our compassion grows, and we become more careful not to accumulate the causes of suffering. Now, what do we mean with losing the sense of self-importance is pride, as it's understood here, is this sort of self-absorption. I'm beautiful, I'm invincible, I have what I want, I'm fulfilled, and all of a sudden something gets in the way. I'm not fulfilled, I'm frustrated, I'm not beautiful, I'm ugly, I'm not rich, I'm poor, I'm worried, I'm all of these things. And that's where this kind of sense of having achieved and arrived and all of that sort of falls apart, and there's just a sense of suffering. And that's where this pride comes undone. There's no longer this self-absorption in which we're just sort of like, I'm fine, and at that point also we're quite numb to the suffering of others. With this kind of breaking down, then there's also a sensitivity that takes place in terms of empathizing and understanding the experience of others. So His Holiness says everyone has at least some unselfish tendencies, however limited. To develop these until the wish to help others become limitless is what is called bodhicitta. The main obstructions to this development are the desire to harm others, resentment, and anger. To counteract these, it's therefore essential to meditate on patience. The more deeply we practice, the less chance there will be for anger to arise. Patience is the best way to avoid anger. So bodhicitta is this place where we go out of this ordinary ignorant cycle of self-centering and we embrace the other. We care about the other, and initially we start off understanding that the other is just as valuable as ourselves, and to the extent also that we care when others are suffering, this is also our concern. And that's eventually up to the place where the Bodhisattva is more concerned about others than him or herself. But what gets in the way of that then is when all of a sudden there is this expulsion or this rejection of the other, which is essentially what anger is, this aggression. And then His Holiness says, now let us talk about love. In my opinion, all beings want to be loved. This is natural and spontaneous. Even animals like people who are kind to them. When someone looks at you with a loving expression, it makes you happy, does it not? Love is a quality that is esteemed throughout humanity in all religions. All religions, including Buddhism, describe their founders above all in terms of their capacity to love. Those that talk about a creator refer to the creator's mercy. And the main quality of those who give spiritual refuge is love. This is important because what do we find appealing about the sage? The sage, we're not attracted to a sage because this is somebody who has all the answers, but we're attracted to the sage due to this quality of magnanimity, this quality of warmth, this quality of love. If we look in the life of the Buddha, we would see at an early stage there's a story where his cousin Devadatta managed to shoot down a swan. And Siddhartha rushed after this wounded swan and held it and nursed it, extracted the arrow from the swan, and basically tried to help it. And Devadatta came along and said, "That's my swan. I shot it." And they disagreed. Siddhartha, he said, "You know, this is my swan because I'm looking after it." And Devadatta said, "No, it's my swan. I shot it." And so they went to a sage, and the sage said, the living belong to those who support life, not those who are trying to take it away. And this, of course, we can understand, and we can understand this quality of caring for others as possibly the most beautiful impulse there exists. It's something we all are attracted to, and we can see this is really where the ordinary self-absorption falls away. So by all measures, also in a secular context, then this quality of love is the most beautiful quality that we can identify in ourselves and in others. And this is, of course, then, as far as enlightenment goes, in the Buddhist context, we could say enlightenment, lack of delusion, is almost intangible, whereas love is something that's very tangible, very felt. And that's also why persons are attracted to the sage. His Holiness then says, when we talk about a pure land filled with the presence of love, people feel like going there. But were we to describe a pure land as a land of warfare and strife, people would no longer feel any desire to be reborn in such a place. People naturally value love, and they dislike harmful feelings and actions such as resentment, anger, fighting, stealing, coveting others' possessions, and wishing to harm others. So if love is something that all human beings prize, it is certainly something that we can develop if we make the effort. So there can be no doubt that this is what everybody wants. At the end of the day, even the most, you could say, hardened warrior and the most sort of argumentative, neurotic person wishes actually for peace, wishes for love, and universally, all beings, not just humans, are drawn to this. So His Holiness says, many people think that to be patient in bearing loss is a sign of weakness. I think this is a mistake. It is anger that is a sign of weakness, whereas patience is a sign of strength. For example, a person arguing a point based on sound reasoning remains confident and may even smile while proving his case. On the other hand, if his reasons are unsound and he is about to lose face, he gets angry, loses control, and starts talking nonsense. People rarely get angry if they're confident in what they're doing. Anger comes more easily in moments of confusion. So it's clear that anger is something that diminishes our intelligence, and patience is something that enhances it. Oh, only one question. Can you elaborate on that statement about patience and concentration forming the basis of bodhicitta? Well, actually, we've covered it now, I think. But anyway, patience, and I guess you can say concentration in the sense of having stability of mind. This is what enables us to not set up some artificial barriers between ourselves and others. So that is by nature bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is the place where we embrace, well, you could say in a relative sense, we embrace the other. In the absolute sense, it's the falling away of duality altogether. But it's on the basis of not allowing this neurotic tendency of anger to destroy or to build up, you could say, set up these barriers and to sort of destroy this, the beauty really of the natural disposition that that embraces the other with love and with tenderness, and ultimately also with bodhicitta, the wishes their liberation. That's where anger gets in the way, and that's where patience is really indispensable. Sometimes it has taken an anger outburst from a partner or friend to alert me to my own ignorant behavior or habit. Well, that's very good, and that proves your value. That that proves your practice of patience. As far as then the other person goes, you can say their anger, while it might have helped you, they might not necessarily have helped them. And it's very often that when we encounter persons that are angry at us, we can turn it into something that helps us on the path. But we shouldn't forget that the other person, on the basis of their anger, might suffer. And so that's where, rather than seeing the other person as an opponent, we should see somebody like that as really somebody who helps us on the journey. And also, while we're being benefited, they might actually be harmed. So in addition to feeling gratitude to them, we should also feel compassion for them in that they're stuck in their particular predicament of anger. Can you give us some points on how to meditate on patience, please? Well, this is what Shantideva is doing here. The methodology really consists of thinking through how harmful anger is. So that's the first. On the basis of reasoning, we can see that anger, we identify anger as something that's really toxic and problematic. So we need to sort of give up this sort of habitual thing that I am righteous, I'm right in being angry at this and that, because we basically can see it's not justified, and it basically just destroys our ability to act. So if we're going to have to do something, anger is not going to help. That's what His Holiness was just saying, those who actually abide by their sanity, they might actually be dealing with this situation with a smile, whereas those that lose it, they lose their cool, so they become ineffective. So that's first of all identifying the problem of anger. So that's where we can meditate like that. Second is beginning to look at also the other. And I think we'll be touching on that. That is then from the point of view of seeing how the other or the circumstance in itself is innocent. Like there might be another person that's acting in a way that's harmful. And that's where we understand that it's not them that is evil as such, but the ignorance behind their actions. So that's also where we see they are innocent, even though they might be acting in ways that are, you could say, detrimental to to achieving our objective. So that's where it's so important that what we're talking about here is never a question of behavior. We're not talking behavior. We're not thinking, what should I do? We're talking about this condition inside ourselves, where patience is really where we enable to sustain clarity, and where we identify anger as really being something that muddles our clarity. So we meditate on this conceptually, like we're doing it here in this chapter, on understanding the value of patience. And then also we engage this in the practice of meditation, where we begin to be less controlled by and dominated by our thoughts altogether. So while we, here in this chapter, we apply, say, conceptual analysis and a conceptual meditation, analytical meditation, then through the practice of shamatha and vipassana, we dismantle the very core of this self-fixation altogether. So that's where the meditation really enables us to understand what's being talked about here. And also what we're talking about here enables us to understand the value of meditation. Just saying. Yeah, okay.
I think like guidelines, if you need to call someone out on circumstances that are creating chaos and things are breaking,
Mm-hmm.
And it needs a sort of a fierceness.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so sometimes we need to be assertive. So sometimes we're in a situation where it doesn't help if we sweet talk to people. So we need to be wrathful. And that's very important. We see this, and that's where we're never talking about becoming doormats. We're never talking about all of a sudden becoming sort of sweet, nice people. We're never talking about behavior. But when we are assertive, we might need to project powerfully in a context. You know, we might need to put the fear of God into somebody. Then that has to be done with kindness. It has to be done without losing our cool. And that's where, for example, in Vajrayana Buddhism, you very often see, for example, you see wrathful deities, which is the quality of acting in a powerful way, yet wrathful deity never moves from kindness and compassion. So it's about us always coming back to a place like, have I lost my cool or not? We know. And that's where parents, they'll sometimes be, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. Even sometimes kids do things that are incredibly, you could say, wrong, but also kind of funny and cute, you know? And there maybe parents have to say, you mustn't do that, even though the parents are actually quite amused. So there has to be this quality of which where we're not bound by anger, where we haven't lost our cool, but we can still project powerfully. And that's again the same thing that has to be said over and over. It's really not about behavior. This is never, patience is never about our external behavior. It's about the mind inside. That's such an important point. Like I say, when we have patience, it's when we are not losing our cool. It's never ever going to be helpful to lose our cool. When other people see an angry person that's lost their cool, they have very little respect. They might have to comply with the angry person, but there's very little respect for the other person. Whereas if there's somebody who's saying something that is imbued with power, truthfully, and coming from a place of intelligence, then everybody respects that. So when His Holiness says patience in bearing loss, he means patience as in unselfishness. Well, also when sometimes things just don't go our way. And so it could be one way or another. But yes, unselfishness sometimes sounds a little bit moralistic. And what we, of course, are talking about here is lack of ego. And you could say the aerial perspective. So that's where the moment that we begin to tighten up about a condition where we've lost something, then, or just lost our dignity or humiliated, or whatever it might be, then very often this results in a tightening of a strong sense of me. And that's where patience is really where things might not go our way, but we don't retreat into this self-centering. So yes, it can mean unselfishness, as long as we don't think with unselfishness as sort of being, you could say, moralistically unselfish. I understood patience to refrain from reacting to kleshas, not just anger. Yeah, that's valid too. To not be fooled by the various kleshas. Yeah, that's valid. Are there specific practices to make amends for an outburst of anger, especially if the consequences have been quite dire for yourself and others? Yes. We would always say that negative actions have one quality, and that is that they can be purified. And so that's where we have teachings such as the four strengths, and all along in the Buddhist path, then there are the practices of what we call amendment, repairing. Because we might have a vision of the value of compassion, wisdom, and the discipline of the path, and so on. We might see that, and yet we succumb again and again to our habitual patterns. And that's where we can actually do something about that. So that's where we have the practices as we have it in the monastic context. Twice a month there is what's called amendment practice, sojong. In the Mahayana, there's the practice of the 35 Buddhas. In Vajrayana, we have Bodhisattva. And what runs through these is something we call the four strengths, which is that we expose our shortcoming to others, to someone that we trust and who embodies truth, that there's a strong sense of regret, and that there's a determination not to do it again, and then there's a following through. So that's very briefly, but there's quite a lot to be said about that. It's not really the time here, but definitely there is practices to do that. Also because we recognize that negative actions do not define who we are. They are acts of neurosis, acts of insecurity that on the basis of kleshas then we've acted upon, but essentially, just like anybody, there's a basic innocence. And that's where neurotic actions are ultimately, and harmful actions are ultimately external to ourselves, external to others. And so they're things that we can part with. They're not intrinsic to who we are. Sorry. Oh yeah. That is a fascinating point. That is a fascinating point about confidence and anger, and how confusion and lack of confidence can be a precursor to anger. Wow, that really makes sense. So it'd be very wise to be aware of feeling nervous and unconfined when we do, and take. So it would be very wise to be very aware of feeling nervous and unconfined when we do, and take very extra special care of our minds when we feel nervous, so as not to very easily become angry. That's right. Yes, that's so true. We particularly, yes, when we are nervous, and yes, that's where it's very important to be aware of this. Yes, that's so true. Sometimes we try to hide how nervous we feel, but better to stay aware of it and try to calm our mind. Yes, His Holiness makes this so clear. He does. Yeah. When you are attentive, you see that anger quickly turns into suffering and self-loathing. Being aware at all times of my own mind state and being honest about it has helped immensely. I see now how all the paramitas are interconnected. Very good. These are the last two, actually. You guys are really agreeing. How do we know if a teacher is using skillful means in a wrathful way? Yeah, that's where we should make sure that we are not hooking up with some teacher who doesn't have genuine qualities. For sure, need to be very discerning about teachers. On the other hand, it's always difficult for us to know about others. And so apart from teachers, then in general, the most important thing really is to know if we ourselves have anger. So our sort of, you could say, sensitivity about anger should not be about looking outside, looking if others have anger, but very much looking at ourselves and if we have anger. If someone is really angry at me, does it help to think this is due to my past karma and now it's being purified? Yes. If you have an awareness of past lives and how this actually constructs the reality and perceptions of this life, this is an essential part really of the meditation on patience, and that is recognizing that it doesn't just come out of the blue. This is due to something that has happened in past lives. Again, like you're saying, then we see this as being something that is purifying us. And that's again where we feel gratitude to the person that, or the circumstance that enables us to have this moment of purification. This is something that helps us. And then again, like I was saying before, also then we also should have compassion for those that might be angry at us. Gratitude and compassion. Okay. Let's see here. Say, all right. Hold on. Okay. Okay. Is it okay to feel really sick when we go out in the world so as to try not to cause trouble? Is it okay to feel really sick when we go out in the world so as to try not to cause trouble? Yeah. I mean, we should be honest. If we are feeling sick, yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, should we expose our vulnerability, if that's what you mean, or if it's actually feeling really sick? But yes, you know, we needn't pretend anything. Yeah, if the intention is this wish to not cause trouble for others, yes. Because I'm very scared of causing trouble through the poisons of mind. Yeah, yes, that's a good thing. Like this, when in wild, unruly crowds, we move with care to share. Oh yeah, that's what this is a yeah, this is a quote from the Way of the Bodhisattva, right? I think it says, "When in wild, unruly crowds, we move with care to shield our broken limbs. Likewise, when we live in evil company, our wounded minds we should not fail to guard." Yes. For if I carefully protect my wounds, because I fear the hurts of cuts and bruises, why should I not guard my wounded mind for fear of being crushed beneath the cliffs of hell? If this is how I act and live, then even in the midst of evil folk, or even with fair women, all is well. My diligent observance of the vows will not decline. Let my property and honor all grow less, and likewise all my health and livelihood, and even other virtues, all can go, but never will I disregard my mind. All you who protect your minds, maintain awareness and your mental vigilance. Guard them both at the cost of life and limb. Thus I join my hands, beseeching you. Thank you. Very beautiful. Thank you very much. When we have lost our dignity and have to go back into that setting, how not to tighten up? Any pithy advice, please? Yes. When we have lost our dignity, that happens. That's completely normal. Then we can repair it. That is the beauty about losing our dignity or whatever, that we can settle back into it. Whatever it might be, we can purify it through the four strengths I was talking about earlier. Practices like amendment practice or Vajrasattva, the practice of Tsok, and all of these they're all intended to establish exactly that. So we should never feel we're carrying something. In fact, the earlier, after we lose our dignity or whatever, the earlier we get onto it, it doesn't actually settle into our being. So if we have a moment of anger, then if we recognize it that very moment, or even an hour later and so on, right away to address it with purification is really essential. Then it doesn't become part of us. So then even if we have made a complete fool of ourselves, then at least you could say the inside has been attended to. So then yes, there might be some, you know, reactions and so on externally, but at least we're not profoundly tainted by that. This is where we can eliminate or get rid of or basically part from these destructive patterns. I didn't realize the time changed and missed the webinar. Please alert us when the time changes. I hate to miss. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. New moon and Buddha Shakyamuni Day today. Is that good for practicing atonement and confession? Very good. Very good day for doing that. Yes, it's new moon today. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry about the time change. That happens twice a year. And of course, if you're not in Australia, then it would be at a different time. So I'm very sorry about that. Usually, actually, what should happen is when you've signed up for these webinars that you get a reminder. So usually you'd get a reminder. I'll check if it's in place, but normally you'd get a reminder 24 hours in advance, and that should take into account the daylight savings time. And also you should get a reminder 1 hour in advance. So that also should take into account. But should dignity be a concern to us? Yeah. Dignity. Well, dignity is just that we're comfortable being who we are. You know, we're not talking about sort of egocentric in that sense. Yeah. And then someone says the reminder was in place. The email gave the new time. Okay, that's good. I'm glad. I got the announcement, but I didn't look carefully. Okay, that happens. Okay. Anyway, the recording will be in the box before long. Okay, thank you very much for joining us here today. Just put a May bodhicitta precious and sublime arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Okay.